Looks like someone digs you. That's adorable. You and the Demi could tour in the freak show.
The Puppet Show is yet another episode that is not highly regarded by the fandom. After this opening statement, you'll probably expect me to tell you that I actually love it. But no, this is one of my least favorite episodes as well. But even a weak Buffy episode still has a lot going for it, and I still got lots to say. The first thing this episode has going for it is that it introduces a new character, and it is the one and only
Principal Snyder.
So, we think school events are stupid, and we think authority figures ought to be made fun of.
No, we don't. Well, unless you do.
And we think our afternoon classes are optional. All three of you left campus yesterday.
Yeah, but we were fighting a demon.
Fighting?
Not fighting.
No, we left to avoid fighting.
Real antisocial types. You need to integrate into this school, people. My predecessor, Mr. Flutie, may have gone in for all that touchy-feely relating nonsense, but he was eaten. You're in my world now. And Sunnydale has touched and felt for the last time.
Instant legend. After the liberal approach of Flutie failed, Sunnydale High brings in a conservative principal. And here, the show connects to a rich tradition. The rock and roll period was all about youth rebellion, and so, the stories of the period always needed to provide an authority figure to rebel against. Starting from the one and only Dean Wormer in Animal House, educational figures often played that part in Hollywood films of the 80s. Sometimes they were college figures, like Dean Wormer, but high school, or even grade school, where kids are obliged to go, provided a better environment. There was always some figure on the school staff that was more authoritarian than they should be, thus, in the rock and roll period logic, representing the true nature of the school. They were usually campy figures, relishing their authority over the children. And Principal Snyder, in my book, outcamps the lot of them. He is an absolutely delightful caricature of an authoritarian, full of hate for the children under his care, and his addition to the show makes it instantly funnier. His scenes alone make this episode worth watching.
Kids. I don't like them. From now on, you're going to see a very different Sunnydale High. A tight ship. Clean, orderly, and quiet.
This is in the vein of 80s films, but these are the 90s, and some things have changed since then. While those films were portraying school authoritarians as a thing messing up your kids' lives, the reality that parents were dealing with was very different, as the post-60s lax liberalism left some schools, those in the harsher areas, in chaos due to the unruly students. One late 80s film swam against the tide. Lean on Me, from 1989, is based on a true story, and tells of a teacher appointed to be the new principal at a high school where the breakdown of authority is so bad, most pupils don't even have basic skills like reading and writing.
We want to welcome Mr. Clark to Eastside. We've heard so much about you, and tell you what we have done in anticipation of your arrival.
You may sit down, Mr. O'Malley. You think you can run this school? If you could, then I wouldn't be here, would I? No one talks in my meetings. No one! You take out your pencils and write. I want the names of every hoodlum, drug dealer, and miscreant who's done nothing but take this place apart on my desk by noon today. This is an institution of learning, ladies and gentlemen. If you can't control it, how can you teach? Discipline is not the enemy of enthusiasm.
He immediately imposes nearly totalitarian rule, defying the parents, the school board, and even the law, determined to force the kids back into shape. And he does, indeed, manage to turn things around. Late 90s films were already admitting this reality, and Buffy, of course, is no exception, portraying Sunnydale High as sitting on a hellmouth. We've established that Flutie's approach was too lenient to deal with this reality, and Snyder, sometimes, sounds like Principal Clark. Maybe we actually need someone like Snyder.
Kids today need discipline. It's an unpopular word these days, discipline. I know Principal Flutie would have said kids need understanding. Kids are human beings. It's the kind of woolly-headed liberal thinking that leads to being eaten.
Unfortunately, this is a question that will never be seriously dealt with. The show has a liberal bent, so although it portrayed Flutie as a failure, it was still a sympathetic portrayal that showed him as a human being trying to do right. Snyder, on the other hand, is just a cartoonish caricature of a conservative, there for the laughs and for having someone to rebel against. It is no coincidence that he has a German name, and Jazz even refers to him as our new Führer, in case we didn't get it. Another thing he brings to the show is giving Buffy another foe she has to contend with. In this episode, his creepiness even makes us wonder if he might be the monster we are looking for. But no, he is just a rodent of a man who enjoys putting kids in their place.
School hours are over. You, therefore, should be gone.
And I'm going any minute now.
There are things I will not tolerate. Students loitering on campus after school. Horrible murders with hearts being removed. And also smoking.
One thing about Snyder, though, is that he does seem to be more aware of what's going on. The official story was that Principal Flutie was eaten by wild dogs, but Snyder implies it was due to his soft approach, hinting that he knows something about the Hellmouth. The question is, will his approach save him from meeting the same fate as Flutie? This question will be answered in the future. But now, let's turn to the story of the episode. Again, this section of videos, the second half of the season, steps out of the rock and roll period and introduces stuff that belongs to other periods. We begin by watching the rehearsals to the school's talent show, where everyone is hilariously talentless. What we have here, essentially, is a variety show. Variety shows originate in the middle of the 19th century and come to prominence in the modernist period. This is the time when the reverence of art reaches its peak. The bourgeoisie, those who determine the spirit of the time, start to regard art as the highest expression of the human spirit, equal to, or even a replacement of, religion, and so they build beautiful places that serve as its home, like museums, concert halls, theaters, opera houses, and libraries. In those temples, art grows more and more sophisticated, gradually detaching from everyday reality and becoming a closed, magical world. The working class, meanwhile, still prefers simpler forms, those regarded derisively as mere vulgar entertainment by the culture guardians. They go to variety shows and watch performances by singers, dancers, comedians, acrobats, jugglers, magicians, and so forth, who take the stage one after the other, each providing a few minutes of entertainment. In Britain it was called music hall and performed in theatre houses. In America it was called vaudeville and performed in traveling tents. It was also one of the places where the pop age incubated. When the pop age commenced, those different forms of entertainment gained power, using the new mediums of radio, cinema, and records to become art. By the 1930s, they grew so big that they became separate worlds, and the age of the variety show ended. There were still popular variety shows on television, like The Ed Sullivan Show, but after The Muppet Show, that was at once both a wonderful variety show and a parody of a variety show, it was over. The only place you can find them now are on talent shows. Principal Snyder, to our young hero's delight, orders Giles to be the producer of the show, and then, to our delight, orders them to participate. And it is on the talent show that we find this week's horror.
Ew, dummy.
Dow! Mine.
I think dummies are cute. You don't?
They give me the wig ever since I was little.
What happened?
I saw a dummy, it gave me the wig. There really wasn't a story there.
In the first section, the monsters were strong female archetypes, part of the girl power statement of the show. In this section, we go for psychology, and some of the monsters are based on phobias, irrational fears that humans suffer from. It is not just Buffy and Xander that get the Wiggins from mimes and ventriloquist dummies. There is something disconcerting about them. Mimes are humans, but they act like dolls or robots, and some people are perturbed by it. But the mime angle is not pursued any further. When the ballet dancer turns out dead, with her heart carved out, we start to suspect that Morgan, the weird ventriloquist, is somehow involved. And so, the episode becomes part of the tradition of ventriloquist dummy horror. Ventriloquism, the art of speaking without moving your lips, is an ancient art. It is said to have originated in the temple of the goddess Athena, in Delphi, where the people would come to ask the all-knowing oracle for advice about the future. Apparently, the priests would use ventriloquism to make it seem like the oracle was answering. The episode kinda pays tribute to it. The stage play that our heroes put on is Oedipus Rex, the classic Greek tragedy, where a chain of events set about by the Delphi oracle leads to horrific outcomes. If it is true that it was a ventriloquist priest, then he has a lot to answer for. But it was in the variety shows of the late 19th century that ventriloquism took its recognizable form, where the ventriloquist is using a dummy to create a funny dialogue. The dummies were made to be the size of a little child, sitting on the handler's lap, and they needed to have exaggerated facial features to be clearly seen in the back rows. This accounts for the familiar ghastly look that disturbs girls like Buffy. In the Hollywood period, the art reached the height of its popularity. In comedy clubs, in motion picture, and even on radio, the artists as well as their dummies became pop stars. And their creepiness proved to be fertile ground for horror, in cinema and TV. The premise is always the same. It looks like a regular ventriloquist act, but then you realize the dummy has a life of its own. The question then becomes if it is the human doing it, either intentionally or because they have a split personality disorder, or is something supernatural going on. Either way, the reveal is always scary. Here, as usual on Buffy, we have several theories going on. Who murdered Emily? Giles' research yields a demon that takes human form and needs to periodically harvest human hearts and minds in order to keep that form. But we, the viewers, believe he's on the wrong trail and have other theories. First, it could be Snyder, who is acting sus. But our main suspicion falls on Morgan and his dummy Sid, as we quickly realize Sid is more than he seems. Our heroes, meanwhile, sense that Morgan is acting weird and start investigating him. The mystery seems to be solved, at least for us, when we see Sid trying to convince Morgan to kill Buffy.
No, I can't do it.
It's the only way.
I don't want...
She's the one.
But
You saw what she did, how strong she is.
I know, but...
She's the last. Just this one more, and I'll be free.
I won't.
I will.
If this was a horror flick, we would still be wondering if Morgan perhaps has a split personality, one personality being good and the other a psycho killer. But we know we are in a universe where the supernatural exists, so we conclude that Sid is a possessed dummy. He says he needs to kill Buffy to be free. What does he mean? Well, if we've been paying close attention, we may recall how this episode began.
I will be whole. I will be new.
The murderer is looking at Emily, and says the murder will make him whole and new. Is Sid the kind of dummy, like Pinocchio, who wants to become flesh? Be a real human? Well, in our collective memory, there's a much fresher precedent than Pinocchio. Chucky, the anti-hero of the hugely popular 1988 horror flick Child's Play, is a speaking doll, a child's toy that gets possessed by the soul of a psychotic serial killer. Chucky then spends the movie trying to become human again, by all means necessary. The success of the film led to many sequels, and Chucky was a very familiar figure in the 90s, a presence that added an extra layer of spookiness to Sid. He does follow on his threat, and tries to attack Buffy in her sleep. This sends Buffy to investigate dummies, and Willow discovers that
Look what I found in the section on toys and magic. On rare occasions, inanimate objects of human quality, such as dolls and mannequins, already mystically possessed of consciousness, have acted upon their desire to become human by harvesting organs.
Emily's heart.
Morgan's dummy.
Xander, meanwhile, isn't buying it. Like Giles in the case of the hyena possession, he can accept many other supernatural occurrences, but not the idea that a dummy can be possessed and animated. In this case, though, his attempt to scully Buffy actually has bad results, because he steals the dummy from Morgan, leaving him defenseless. This is the first time, but not the last, that a seemingly casual act of youth frivolity by our heroes leads to tragic results. Buffy soon stumbles over Morgan's dead body, with his brain removed. This is actually a shame, because it means we don't get to learn what part he played in the story. How did Morgan and Sid connect? We never find out. We still suspect Sid at this point, since he slipped away from Xander. He then attacks Buffy again, and the two fight until they realize they both mistook each other for the killer. Then, finally, Sid gets to tell his story.
This is what I do. I hunt demons.
This is the first time we hear there are other demon fighters in the world, not just the Slayer. Helps explain why the world outside of Sunnydale isn't overrun by monsters.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it to look at me. Let's just say there was me, there was a really mean demon, there was a curse, and the next thing I know, I'm not me anymore. I'm sitting on some guy's knee, with his hand up my shirt. In any case, now that this demon's got the heart and brain, he gets to keep the human form he's in for another 7 years.
I must say it's a welcome change to have someone else explain all these things.
There were 7 of these guys. I've killed 6. If I can get the last one, the curse will be lifted and I'll be free. I'm sure it's someone in that stupid talent show.
So, Giles was actually right all along. It is the demon he was suspecting. When we heard him say that he will be whole and new, it means that he would get a new heart and mind, and get to keep his human form, which is apparently one of the kids on the talent show. But Sid also wants to be set free of the curse, and will be once he gets the demon. When was Sid cursed? Well, from the way he dresses, talks, and behaves, we can deduce that the human Sid lived in the Hollywood period. I call it the Hollywood period because this was when Hollywood was the center of pop culture. This period was also the transitional phase between the modern and pop ages, when we can find both mindsets coexisting and interacting. We discussed how the modern mindset was about man actualizing himself, achieving his full potential, both as universal humanity and as an individual who is part of it. The belief was that the two are compatible, that a fully actualized humanity will also allow every human individual in it to actualize themselves. The pop mindset of the Hollywood period was also about self-actualization of the individual, but believed it could be done in the here and now, without having to wait for the modern utopia. The Hollywood stars provided the model. Every star had one character they played in all of their movies, and that character provided the role model for how to exist in a modern world. The goal of the individual, back then, was to find yourself, and once you did, it was believed, you would live an authentic life. The Hollywood stars were there to help. Everyone had a star they most identified with, presumably the one closest to who you are inside. By emulating that star, you could develop your own individuality until finally you figured out who you are and became an authentic individual. Even the monster horror flicks of the 1930s were part of that. The monsters were taken mainly from Gothic literature, but they were changed. The aim was to humanize them, portrayed them as individuals who can't find their place in the human world. Thus, even they became a character that some people could identify with. The rock and roll period brought change. Because it was driven by youth, the idea wasn't so much to find yourself, but to keep changing, experience the fluid and volatile identity of the years of youth. By the 1970s, the glam artists were suggesting that this should not be confined to youth, but this is what you should keep on doing throughout your life. Keep on periodically changing your identity, because this is how you can remain forever young. By the 1980s, it became the norm, and music stars were expected to present a new identity with every new album, an identity that actualizes who they are at the moment. We started to regard reality as ever-changing, with every moment having its own truth. We sometimes see Buffy making fun of vampires who remain stuck with the style of the time they were sired. They serve as metaphor for those who fail to move on with the time. The 1980s brought back the monster movies, as Hollywood creators and studios tried to come up with monsters that would become a pop culture icon, one you could build a franchise around. Unlike 30s Hollywood monsters, though, the attempt was not to humanize them, but rather to make them as inhuman as possible. One aspect of the inhumanity was that they never changed, but always came back the same, unkillable and unalterable, no matter what you did. This is where Chucky is different from Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a Bildung story, in which the wooden hero has to grow mentally before he can become flesh. This is the modern idea of change that comes through organic growth, where every new phase builds upon what came before. The rock and roll period wasn't so much about growth, but it was about change, about making yourself anew and thus becoming young again. Chucky is incapable of either growth or change. He can become flesh again, like Pinocchio, but that is to be done by a single act of magic. Until he can perform that ritual, he remains unchanged. This is the kind of monster we are dealing with in this episode. The demon we are fighting wants to have human form because he likes it better than his demon form. For that, he has to periodically kill humans, harvest their organs, and perform a ritual that renews him. In this way, he remains not just human, but forever a teenager. In a way, it is a criticism of the mindset of the rock and roll period. Rather than being an ideal, as it was throughout the period, here the desire to remain forever young is portrayed as demonic. As we've already discussed in a previous video, Buffy is a show that, while maintaining many of the aspects of the rock and roll period, goes back to the idea of a Bildung story, giving it meaning within the logic of the pop age. We mentioned the vampires that fail to change with time, but not all vampires are like that. The vampires who managed to survive for centuries, like the Master, Darla, and Angel, did so because they were capable of changing with the times, and they look cool even in the 1990s. But one thing that they are incapable of is growth. Meanwhile, Buffy, while changing with the time, is also growing as a person, and this growth will eventually make her strong enough to take on the Master and any other big bad that will follow. Sid is a different story. His wooden predicament is a metaphor for someone who is unable of growing and changing. He is stuck in the Hollywood period, in every way. One aspect of it is the way he talks to women.
Look at the goodies.
The Hollywood period valued rugged masculinity, and men were supposed to be hard-boiled and rough. They didn't follow the old rules of decorum when talking to the other sex, but were rather fresh with the ladies. Most women, back then, still stayed home, and those who did go out into the world knew that they were entering a man's world, and developed a tough character that could take it. In the rock and roll period, all women were out there, and they were no longer willing to play along. Sid surely knows it, but he is stuck in his old ways.
how about you and I do a little rehearsing on our own, honey?
Hey.
You know what they say. Once you go wood, nothing's as good.
Okay, Morgan, we get the joke. Horny dummy, ha ha. It's very funny, but you might want to consider getting some new shtick. Unless you want your prop ending up as a Duraflame log.
This, in our time, is a hellish existence. The Hollywood period valued having a unique character that you stuck with, but after that period, it was all about change. Sid cannot change, and he also cannot live the life he wants to live. As we already discussed in the video on episode 5, if you remain stuck in a certain period, the world leaves you behind, and you cannot find yourself in it, cannot live a full life. In Sid's case, this manifests in his inability to fulfill those desires that still drive him. He knows it, too.
I knew a slayer in the 30s. Korean chick. Very hot. We're talking muscle tone. Man, we had some times. Hey, that was pre-dummy, all right? I was a guy.
So, you kill the demon, and the curse is lifted, right?
That's the drill.
You don't actually turn into a prince, do you? I mean, your body...
Is dust and bones. When I say free...
You mean dead.
Don't get sniffly on me, sis. I've lived a lot longer than most demon hunters. Or slayers, for that matter. Of course, if you want to snuggle up and comfort me...
So that horny dummy thing really isn't an act, is it?
Nope.
Sid is in hell, and freedom, for him, is death, which will get him out of this permanently wooden state. For Buffy, he represents a fear that will haunt her throughout the show, a fear that the life of demon hunting will consume her as well, detach her from everyday life, until she will be unable to enjoy her life any longer. This was actually a fear that young people in the rock and roll period all lived with. The fear that you will get stuck in some sort of life, until one day, around age 40, you will wake up and realize that the world has left you behind, that you are no longer able to understand and enjoy contemporary culture, and that you are trapped in a meaningless existence. In Buffy's case, this fear is all the more palpable. But Sid also shows an ability to cope with it, to remind himself that he is fighting a good fight, that his life did have meaning. This is something that Buffy should learn to do more of. Meanwhile, our heroes find out that the reason for Morgan's weird behavior was that he had brain cancer, and that for that reason, the demon rejected his brain and is looking for another brain. We, the viewers, realize that the demon is Mark, the hapless magician. They also figure out that he is probably after Giles' brain, since he is very smart, just as Giles does what is probably the dumbest thing he ever does on the show, and agrees to let Mark put his head in a guillotine, even though he knows his magic tricks always fail. But Giles is saved in the nick of time, and our heroes fight the demon and defeat it, with the help of Sid, who dies a hero. The way Buffy cradles his lifeless body in her arms shows how much she identified with his predicament. We still need to discuss our rock and roll moment, and here it comes courtesy of Cordelia.
Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all.
Cordelia is another example of someone who is not living an authentic existence, but in her case, it is because she has a fake persona, meant not to express how she feels inside, but to make her popular in the eyes of others. For the talent show, she decides to perform The Greatest Love of All, a song about someone who is doing the exact opposite, living the way they want to live. It makes them unpopular in the eyes of many, but they come to love themselves as a result, and that is the greatest love of all, a love that makes your existence a happy one. Cordelia's lack of self-awareness is manifested, first of all, in her not realizing that she is completely butchering this beautiful song, done most famously by Whitney Houston, and secondly, in that she completely misunderstands the lyrics and turns its self-love into an expression of her narcissism.
I don't understand why why I have to follow Brett and his stupid band.
Because we have to clear their equipment before the finale, I've told you.
But the mood, it'll be all wrong. My song is about dignity and human feelings and personal hygiene or something. Anyway, it's sappy. And no one is going to be feeling sappy after all that rock and roll.
But there is another side to Cordy. When she dances to rock and roll, and when she smiles, something more real is radiating out of her. Somewhere inside, she is aware. She knows that rock and roll is about true passion, and that her fake persona will not be believed after people got a dose of rock and roll into their veins. There is a more real Cordy, trying to break out of her phony shell. Learning to love herself, her true self, will be her challenge. Of course, a few years later, this type of variety talent shows made a comeback through TV reality shows in which the audience would vote for their favorite talents. The biggest one was the singing contest American Idol, and part of its draw was the hilarious audition stage, in which thousands of kids, some of them even less self-aware than Cordelia about how terrible they were, tried to be picked for the contest. In the process, alas, Cordelia's request to silence rock and roll was granted. It meant that young musicians now became stars not because they emerged out of a musical subculture, but because they were deemed good by the musical producers who served as judges. It signaled the end of the rock and roll period. So much for this episode. Not much of an episode, but before I go, I want to give a special shout out to Lisa, the tuba player. She's as bad as the rest, but the pitiful sounds of her tuba, playing in the background, perfectly underscore the sad and pathetic, yet comical, conversations around the Sunnydale talent show. Much like Sid's sarcastic remarks about Morgan's lack of talent, her tuba is remarking on the whole event, perhaps on the whole episode. The show is not taking itself very seriously at this point, but we are getting close to the moment when it will.